The scream tore from Eleanor Voss's throat before she even realized she was awake, her nightgown soaked through with sweat, her hands clutching the thin sheets of her boarding-house bed as if they could anchor her to reality. It was the same nightmare again, the one where flames consumed everything she loved while shadowy figures laughed from the darkness, their faces twisted into grotesque masks that she could never quite make out before she woke. She pressed her palms against her eyes, willing her racing heart to slow, but the images clung to her mind like smoke residue on fabric. "Miss Voss." Mrs. Henderson's concerned voice came through the door, followed by a gentle knock. "Are you all right, dear? That's the third time this week." Eleanor forced herself to breathe slowly in and out before responding. "I'm fine, Mrs. Henderson. Just a bad dream. I apologize for disturbing you." There was a pause, then the sound of retreating footsteps. Eleanor knew she couldn't keep this up much longer. She had come to Abilene, Texas in the spring of 1882, seeking a fresh start after the fire that had claimed her family's ranch in Oklahoma Territory 2 years prior. She had been 20 then, the sole survivor of a tragedy that the territorial marshal had ruled accidental, though Eleanor's instincts told her otherwise. The nightmares had started immediately after, vivid and relentless, robbing her of peace and leaving her exhausted during her waking hours. She rose from bed and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet main street of Abilene. Dawn was still an hour away, but she could see lamplight in a few windows, early risers preparing for the day. She had found work as a schoolteacher here, grateful for the opportunity to rebuild her life, but the constant exhaustion was taking its toll. Her students deserved better than a teacher who could barely keep her eyes open by afternoon. Eleanor dressed quietly and made her way downstairs, hoping to slip out before the other boarders woke. She needed air, needed to walk, needed anything to clear her mind of the lingering dread. The September morning was cool, a blessed relief from the oppressive heat that had dominated the summer months. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the wooden sidewalk, her boots making soft sounds against the planks. "Bit early for a stroll, miss." She startled, turning to find a man leaning against the post outside the general store. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that seemed to catch what little light the pre-dawn offered. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, well-worn but clean, and there was something in his posture that suggested he was as comfortable in the darkness as most people were in daylight. "I could say the same to you," Eleanor replied, recovering her composure. He smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely warm. "Fair point. Isaiah Vance, madam. I work at the Double T Ranch just west of town. Been up all night with a sick mare. She finally settled, so I thought I'd walk a bit before heading back." Eleanor Voss. "I teach at the schoolhouse. I've heard about you," Isaiah said, straightening from his casual lean. "The new teacher from Oklahoma. Folks speak well of you." Eleanor felt an unexpected flush of pleasure at the compliment, though she quickly tamped it down. She had not come to Abilene looking for companionship, romantic or otherwise. Her focus needed to be on healing, on moving forward, on somehow finding a way to sleep through the night without waking in terror. "That's kind of them," she said simply. Isaiah studied her for a moment, and Eleanor had the unsettling feeling that he saw more than she wanted to reveal. "You look tired, if you don't mind me saying. Everything all right?" The genuine concern in his voice nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. She opened her mouth to give him a polite dismissal, but what came out instead surprised her. "I have nightmares every night." The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and raw. Eleanor immediately regretted it, wondering what had possessed her to share such a personal truth with a complete stranger. But Isaiah's expression didn't change to one of pity or discomfort. Instead, he simply nodded as if she had told him something important and worth knowing. "Then I'll guard your dreams," he said quietly. Eleanor blinked, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon, your dreams," Isaiah repeated, his voice steady and sure. "If they're plagued by nightmares, then someone should stand watch. I'm volunteering." "That's ridiculous," Eleanor said, though her voice lacked conviction. "You don't even know me, and how exactly would you guard my dreams? Stand outside my window all night like some sort of sentry, if that's what it takes," Isaiah said simply. "But I was thinking more along the lines of getting to know you, figuring out what's causing these nightmares, and seeing if maybe having someone to talk to might help ease them." Eleanor wanted to argue, to tell him that her problems were her own, and she neither needed nor wanted his help. But the truth was that she was drowning in exhaustion and fear, and the idea of someone caring enough to try to help was more appealing than she wanted to admit. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" she asked instead. Isaiah was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the horizon where the first hints of pink were beginning to color the sky. "My younger sister used to have terrible nightmares after our mother passed. She was only 8, and she'd wake up screaming every night for months. My father didn't know what to do, so I started sleeping on the floor next to her bed. Didn't stop the nightmares right away, but knowing someone was there seemed to help. Eventually, they faded. She's married now, living in San Antonio, sleeping peaceful as can be." The story touched something deep in Eleanor's chest, a longing for that kind of simple comfort and protection. "I'm not a child," she said softly. "No, madam, you're not," Isaiah agreed. "But sometimes even grown folks need someone to stand watch while they rest. No shame in it." Eleanor looked at this cowboy who had appeared out of the pre-dawn darkness with his impossible promise and his kind eyes, and she made a decision that would change everything. "All right then, Mr. Vance. I accept your offer, though I think you'll find I'm a lost cause." "Isaiah," he corrected gently. "And I don't believe in lost causes, Miss Voss." "Eleanor," she said, surprising herself again. "If we're going to do this, we should use first names." His smile returned, bright as the rising sun. "Eleanor it is, then." They walked together as dawn broke over Abilene, and Eleanor found herself talking more freely than she had in 2 years. She told him about the fire, about waking to find her family's ranch house engulfed in flames, about barely escaping with her life while her parents and younger brother perished. She told him about the nightmares that followed, the same images repeating night after night, the feeling of being watched by malevolent eyes she could never quite see. Isaiah listened without interrupting, his presence steady and reassuring beside her. When she finally fell silent, drained by the telling, he spoke carefully. "You remember anything unusual about the night of the fire? Anything that seemed off?" Eleanor frowned, trying to recall details she had tried so hard to forget. "There were horses," she said slowly. "I remember hearing horses riding away as I stood outside watching the house burn. The marshal said it was probably neighbors coming to see what was happening and leaving when they realized it was too late to help." "But you don't think so," Isaiah said, and it wasn't a question. "No," Eleanor admitted. "I don't. My father had been having trouble with a man named Garrett Webb. Webb wanted to buy our land, said he needed it to expand his cattle operation. My father refused because the land had been in our family for 3 generations. They had words about it in town, heated words. A week later, our house burned down. Did the marshal investigate Webb? He said he did. Webb had witnesses who said he was in town that night, playing cards at the saloon. The marshal ruled it an accident, said a lamp must have tipped over." "Case closed." Isaiah's jaw tightened, But you think Webb paid someone to do it. I know he did, Eleanor said fiercely. I just can't prove it. And even if I could, what good would it do now? My family is gone, the ranch is gone, everything is gone. Justice might bring you peace, Isaiah suggested gently. Eleanor shook her head. I don't want revenge. I just want to sleep through the night without seeing their faces in the flames. They had circled back to the boarding house, and Eleanor realized with surprise that more than an hour had passed. She needed to prepare for the school day, but she felt lighter somehow, as if sharing her burden had reduced its weight. Thank you, she said sincerely, for listening, for not thinking I'm crazy. You're not crazy, Isaiah said firmly. You're grieving and traumatized, and that's completely understandable. But we're going to help you heal, Eleanor. I promise you that. You can't promise something like that, Eleanor said, but there was no heat in her words. Watch me, Isaiah replied with a confidence that made her almost believe him. They established a routine over the following days. Isaiah would meet Eleanor each morning for a walk before she had to be at the schoolhouse, and he would come by in the evenings to sit on the boarding house porch with her, talking until the sun set and the first stars appeared. Mrs. Henderson initially viewed these visits with suspicion, protective of her young boarder, but Isaiah's respectful demeanor and Eleanor's obvious improvement gradually won her over. The nightmares didn't stop immediately, but they began to change. Instead of being alone in her terror, Eleanor would sometimes dream of a figure standing between her and the flames, broad-shouldered and protective. She would wake still frightened but no longer quite so alone, and she found herself thinking of Isaiah's promise, his steady presence, his unwavering belief that she could heal. Isaiah, for his part, found himself thinking about Eleanor far more than was probably wise. He had meant what he said about helping her, but he hadn't anticipated how drawn to her he would become. She was beautiful, certainly, with her honey-colored hair and green eyes that held depths of pain and strength in equal measure. But it was her resilience that truly captivated him. The way she continued to teach her students with patience and care despite her own suffering. The way she refused to let her trauma define her, even as it haunted her nights. He had not been entirely truthful with her about his reasons for wanting to help. Yes, his sister's nightmares had taught him the value of standing watch, but there was more to it than that. Isaiah had spent his 24 years drifting from ranch to ranch, competent with horses and cattle but never quite settling anywhere. He had told himself he was simply a restless spirit, but the truth was he had never found anything or anyone worth staying for. Until now. 3 weeks into their routine, on a particularly warm September evening, Eleanor surprised him by asking, "Would you like to see where I teach?" The schoolhouse was a simple wooden structure at the edge of town, single-roomed with rows of desks and a blackboard at the front. Eleanor lit a lamp and showed him around with obvious pride, pointing out the books she had managed to acquire, the maps on the walls, the small library corner she was building. "You love this," Isaiah observed, watching her face glow in the lamplight. "I do," Eleanor admitted. These children are hungry to learn, to better themselves. Some of them come from families that have nothing, but they show up every day ready to work. It matters, what I'm doing here. It helps me feel like my life has purpose again. It does have purpose, Isaiah said seriously. You're giving these kids opportunities they might never have otherwise. That's no small thing, Eleanor. She smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes, and Isaiah felt something shift in his chest. He was falling in love with this woman, he realized. Probably had been since that first morning when she had trusted him with her truth. "Tell me about the ranch you work at," Eleanor said, settling onto one of the student benches and gesturing for him to join her. "The double T, you've mentioned it, but never really talked about it." Isaiah sat beside her, aware of the small space between them, the warmth of her presence. It's owned by Thomas Tanner, a good man, fair employer, treats his workers well. He runs about 3,000 head of cattle, has decent grazing land and access to water. I've been there about 2 years now, working as a wrangler primarily. The horses are my favorite part. Do you want your own ranch someday? Eleanor asked. I used to think so, Isaiah said honestly. But lately I've been thinking maybe there are more important things than land and cattle. Like what? He looked at her, holding her gaze. Like building a life with someone, like having a home that's about the people in it rather than the property it sits on, like finding someone worth staying for. Eleanor's breath caught, and Isaiah could see the understanding dawn in her eyes. Isaiah, I know it's fast, he said quickly. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I meant what I said that first morning, Eleanor. I want to guard your dreams, all of them. The nightmares and the good dreams too. I want to be the one who stands between you and whatever darkness might come, and I want to wake up next to you knowing you slept peaceful through the night. I'm damaged, Eleanor whispered. I'm broken in ways I don't know how to fix. You're not broken, Isaiah said fiercely, reaching out to take her hand. You're healing, and that's different. And you don't have to heal alone, Eleanor. Let me be part of your healing. Let me love you. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, and Isaiah gently wiped them away with his thumb. What if the nightmares never stop? She asked. What if I wake up screaming for the rest of my life? Then I'll be there every time, Isaiah said simply. I'll hold you and remind you that you're safe and loved until you can fall back asleep. And eventually, maybe the nightmares will realize they're not welcome anymore and they'll leave on their own. Eleanor laughed through her tears, a sound of mingled hope and disbelief. You make it sound so simple. Because it is simple, Isaiah insisted. Not easy, but simple. I love you, Eleanor. I think I started loving you the moment you trusted me with your truth, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that love is stronger than fear. I want to believe that, Eleanor said softly. Then believe it, Isaiah urged. Take a chance on us, on me. I promise you won't regret it. Eleanor looked at him, this cowboy who had walked into her life at dawn and offered to guard her dreams, and she felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years' hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe she could have a future beyond her past, that maybe she could be happy again. All right, she said, her voice stronger now. All right, Isaiah Vance, I'll take that chance. I'll trust you with my dreams. Isaiah's face broke into a grin so wide and genuine that Eleanor couldn't help but smile back. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Eleanor felt safer than she had since before the fire. His heartbeat was steady against her ear, his arms strong around her, and for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to simply rest in someone else's strength. They stayed like that for a long while, sitting in the quiet schoolhouse with lamplight casting gentle shadows on the walls. When they finally left, Isaiah walked Eleanor back to the boarding house, and they sat on the porch steps talking until well past midnight. Eleanor's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but she didn't want the evening to end. You need sleep, Isaiah said eventually, though he seemed as reluctant as she was to part. I know, Eleanor admitted, but I always dread going to bed. The nightmares are just dreams, Isaiah finished gently. They can't actually hurt you, Eleanor. They're memories and fears all tangled up together, but they're not real. And tonight when you sleep, I want you to remember something. What's that? That you're not alone anymore. That there's someone who loves you standing watch, even if I'm not physically here. Can you do that? Eleanor nodded, squeezing his hand. I'll try. That's all I ask, Isaiah said. He stood and helped her to her feet, then leaned down to press a soft kiss to her forehead. Sleep well, Eleanor. Dream of good things. That night, for the first time in 2 years, Eleanor slept without nightmares. She dreamed, instead of sunrise walks and patient horses, of schoolchildren laughing and a tall cowboy with kind eyes who had promised to guard her dreams. When she woke the next morning, she felt rested in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. Isaiah was waiting for her on the boarding house steps when she came down, 2 cups of coffee in hand, and a smile that suggested he somehow knew she had slept peacefully. "Good morning," he said, handing her a cup. "It is," Eleanor agreed, her own smile radiant. "It really is, Isaiah." Their courtship progressed naturally from there, though calling it a courtship seemed almost inadequate for the depth of connection they shared. They continued their morning walks and evening conversations, but now there was an added sweetness to their time together, an acknowledgement of love freely given and gratefully received. Eleanor met Thomas Tanner when Isaiah invited her out to the Double T Ranch one Sunday afternoon. The ranch owner was a weathered man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a quick smile, and he clearly thought highly of Isaiah. "This is the young lady you've been telling me about," Tanner said, shaking Eleanor's hand firmly. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Voss. Isaiah here has been walking around like a lovesick calf for weeks. Good to finally put a face to the name." "Thank you for having me, Mr. Tanner," Eleanor said, amused by Isaiah's embarrassed expression. "Call me Tom," Tanner said easily. "Come on, I'll show you around." Isaiah's too busy blushing to be much use at the moment. The ranch was impressive, sprawling across good grazing land with a solid main house, bunkhouse, barn, and several corrals. Eleanor watched Isaiah work with the horses, marveling at his patience and skill. He had a gentle way with the animals that reminded her of how he was with her, firm but kind, confident but never harsh. "He's a good man," Tom said, coming to stand beside her at the corral fence. "Best wrangler I've ever had, truth be told, but more than that, he's decent. Treats everyone fair, doesn't complain, always willing to help out. You could do a lot worse." "I know," Eleanor said softly, watching Isaiah calm a skittish mare with steady hands and a low voice. "I consider myself very fortunate." "He feels the same about you," Tom assured her. "Never seen him so settled, so content. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Eleanor spent the afternoon at the ranch, meeting the other workers and learning about the cattle operation. She found herself genuinely interested in the work, asking questions about the market, the drives, the challenges of maintaining such a large herd. Tom seemed impressed by her intelligence and curiosity. "You're welcome here anytime," he told her as Isaiah prepared to drive her back to town in the ranch wagon. "Consider yourself family." The word family hit Eleanor harder than she expected, and she had to blink back sudden tears. She had been without family for so long, had felt so alone, that the casual inclusion meant more than Tom could possibly know. On the drive back, Isaiah noticed her quiet mood. "You all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I'm wonderful," Eleanor said honestly. "Your boss is a good man." "The ranch is beautiful. I can see why you've stayed there." "Tom's been good to me," Isaiah agreed. "But Eleanor, there's something I want to talk to you about." She looked at him, noting the serious set to his jaw. "What is it?" "Tom's offered to sell me some land," Isaiah said. "About 200 acres on the western edge of the property. It's good land, with water access and room for a house and barn. He's giving me a fair price and says I can pay him back over time. I've saved up enough for a down payment." Eleanor's heart began to race. "That's wonderful, Isaiah." "Why do you sound worried?" "Because I want to build a life there," Isaiah said, pulling the wagon to a stop so he could look at her properly. "A real life, Eleanor. A house, some horses, maybe a few head of cattle to start. But more than that, I want to build it with you. I want you to be my wife." Eleanor stared at him, her mind racing. They had known each other for barely 2 months, and yet it felt like she had known him forever. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, had stood by her through her darkness, had loved her not despite her brokenness but through it. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "Marriage is a serious commitment, Isaiah. You'd be taking on my nightmares, my grief, all the baggage I carry." "I'm taking on you," Isaiah corrected. "All of you, nightmares and grief included, and I count it a privilege, not a burden. I love you, Eleanor Voss. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build a home with you, raise children with you if we're blessed that way, grow old with you. Say yes. Please say yes." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Isaiah, I'll marry you." Isaiah let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses and pulled Eleanor into his arms, kissing her with all the pent-up love and longing he had been carefully restraining. Eleanor kissed him back, tasting happiness and hope and the promise of a future she had thought lost forever. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Abilene. Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire service, delighted to see her young boarder so happy. Tom Tanner stood as Isaiah's witness, and one of Eleanor's fellow teachers, a kind woman named Sarah Mitchell, stood with Eleanor. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Eleanor felt something inside her chest unlock and open, as if her heart was finally free to love fully again. They spent their wedding night in a hotel in Abilene, a small luxury that Isaiah insisted on. Eleanor was nervous, aware that her nightmares had not entirely disappeared and worried about what would happen if she woke screaming on her wedding night. But Isaiah held her close, his presence steady and reassuring, and when she finally fell asleep in his arms, she dreamed of building a house on a hill, of children's laughter, of a life filled with light instead of darkness. She woke once in the night, startled by a dream that wasn't quite a nightmare but wasn't peaceful either. Isaiah was immediately alert, his arms tightening around her. "I'm here," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe. I've got you." Eleanor relaxed back into his embrace, her breathing slowing as his words washed over her. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Isaiah replied. "Now sleep. Dream of our house, our future, all the good things we're going to build together." And she did. The following months were a whirlwind of activity and adjustment. Eleanor continued teaching while Isaiah worked at the Double T, but every spare moment was devoted to building their home on the land Tom had sold them. Isaiah did most of the physical labor with help from some of the other ranch hands, but Eleanor was there whenever she could be, helping with the smaller tasks and planning the interior layout. The house was modest but well built, 2 stories with 3 bedrooms, a parlor, a kitchen, and a wide front porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. Isaiah built the frame sturdy and true, thinking ahead to the future when children might run through those rooms, when grandchildren might visit, when a lifetime of memories would be made within those walls. Eleanor threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains, painting walls, arranging furniture they purchased bit by bit from the general store. She planted a garden beside the house, herbs and vegetables and flowers that would bloom come spring. She hung pictures on the walls and filled the shelves with books, creating a space that was warm and welcoming. They moved in just before Christmas, carrying their belongings across the threshold together. Isaiah had surprised Eleanor by insisting on carrying her over as well, laughing at her protests. "Tradition," he said firmly, holding her easily in his strong arms. "We did it when we married, and we'll do it now for our first home." "You're ridiculous," Eleanor said, but she was smiling as she said it. You love me anyway, Isaiah countered, and Eleanor couldn't argue with that. Their first night in the new house, they sat on the parlor floor in front of the fireplace, eating a simple dinner and planning for the future. Isaiah talked about the horses he wanted to raise, his dream of breeding quality stock that would be sought after across Texas. Eleanor shared her hope of eventually starting a library in Abilene, a place where anyone could come to borrow books regardless of their ability to pay. We're going to have a good life here, Isaiah said, pulling Eleanor close. I can feel it. I think you're right, Eleanor agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. She felt content in a way she had never expected to feel again, grounded and secure in this home they had built together. The nightmares had become less frequent since the wedding, though they still came occasionally. But now, when Eleanor woke in terror, Isaiah was always there, holding her and whispering reassurances until the fear passed. He never complained, never made her feel like a burden. He simply kept his promise, guarding her dreams night after night with patient love. Winter passed into spring, and Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. Joy at the thought of bringing a child into the world with Isaiah, terror at the responsibility and the memories of her own lost family. But Isaiah's delight was so pure and unrestrained that it helped ease her fears. We're having a baby, he kept saying, wonder in his voice. Eleanor, we're going to be parents. We are, she confirmed, laughing at his excitement. Though you realize this means you'll be guarding not just my dreams but our child's as well. I'll guard all of you, Isaiah said seriously, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Every dream, every hope, every moment, that's my job and I take it very seriously. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, moved by his devotion. How did I get so lucky? She whispered. I'm the lucky one, Isaiah countered, kissing her softly. You gave me purpose, Eleanor. You gave me a reason to build instead of just drift. You gave me a home. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Eleanor found teaching increasingly challenging as she grew larger. She worked up until a month before the baby was due, determined to see her students through the end of the school year. Isaiah fretted about her overdoing it, but Eleanor was adamant. These children need me, she told him, and I need them. Teaching gives me something to focus on besides worrying about the birth. You're going to be a wonderful mother, Isaiah assured her, just like you're a wonderful teacher and a wonderful wife. I hope so, Eleanor said quietly. I'm terrified I won't know what to do, that I'll fail somehow. That's impossible, Isaiah said firmly. You love already, Eleanor. That's the most important part. The rest we'll figure out together. Their son was born on a hot July afternoon in 1883, after 12 hours of difficult labor that left Eleanor exhausted, and Isaiah nearly out of his mind with worry. But when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Eleanor's arms, all the fear and pain melted away, replaced by a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. Hello, little one, she whispered, studying the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the impossibly small fingers curled into fists. Welcome to the world. Isaiah sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, his eyes fixed on his son with an expression of such wonder that Eleanor fell in love with him all over again. He's perfect, Isaiah breathed. Eleanor, he's absolutely perfect. He is, she agreed. What should we name him? They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Isaiah said, What about James, after your father? Eleanor's breath caught, tears welling up. Her father's name had been James, a good man who had worked hard and loved his family deeply. Naming their son after him felt like honoring that memory, acknowledging the past while building toward the future. James, she repeated softly. James Vance, I love it. Baby James was a content child, sleeping well and crying rarely, which Eleanor and Isaiah both counted as a blessing. Eleanor had worried that motherhood would trigger more nightmares, but the opposite proved true. Something about holding her son, about being responsible for his well-being, seemed to push the darkness further away. She still had occasional bad dreams, but they were infrequent now, mere echoes of the terror that had once plagued her every night. Isaiah was a devoted father, doting on James with the same patience and gentleness he showed the horses. He would walk the baby around their property in the evenings, pointing out the stars and the animals, talking to his son in a low voice about everything and nothing. Eleanor would watch them from the porch, her heart full to bursting with love for her family. When James was 6 months old, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. She was hanging laundry when a well-dressed man rode up to the house on a fine bay horse. She didn't recognize him, but something about his bearing suggested wealth and authority. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously, wiping her hands on her apron. "Are you Eleanor Voss?" the man asked, then corrected himself. "Forgive me, Eleanor Vance." "I am," Eleanor confirmed, tension creeping into her shoulders. "Who are you?" "My name is Daniel Hart. I'm a U.S. Marshal based out of Fort Smith, Arkansas. I've been investigating a series of suspicious fires in Oklahoma Territory and Texas, and your family's case came up in my research." "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Eleanor's heart began to pound. "About the fire that killed my family." "Yes, madam," Marshal Hart said gently. "I believe there may be more to it than the local marshal concluded. Would you mind if I asked you some questions?" Eleanor glanced toward the house where James was napping, then back at the marshal. "My husband should be here for this. He works at the Double T Ranch, about an hour's ride. Could you come back this evening?" "Of course," Hart agreed. "Would 7 o'clock be convenient?" Eleanor nodded, and the marshal tipped his hat before riding away. She stood in the yard long after he disappeared, her mind whirling. She had tried to put the fire behind her, to focus on building her new life, but the old questions had never really gone away. If there was a chance of finally getting answers, of finally getting justice for her family, she had to take it. Isaiah was alarmed when she told him about the marshal's visit, but he agreed they needed to hear what Hart had to say. That evening, with James playing on a blanket between them, they sat in their parlor and listened as Daniel Hart laid out his investigation. "Over the past 3 years, there have been 7 suspicious fires in Oklahoma Territory and northern Texas," Hart explained. "In every case, the property belonged to ranchers who had refused to sell their land to buyers backed by a syndicate operating out of Kansas City. In every case, the local investigation ruled the fires accidental, but the pattern is too consistent to be coincidence." "Garrett Webb," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "He wanted our land. He threatened my father." "Webb is part of it," Hart confirmed, "but he's not the mastermind. He works for the syndicate, buying up land for them using whatever methods necessary. We've been building a case against the organization for the past year, and we finally have enough evidence to make arrests. But we need victims willing to testify." "You want me to testify against Webb?" Eleanor said slowly. "I know it's a lot to ask," Hart said. "The trial would be in Fort Smith, and you'd need to tell your story in front of a courtroom. It won't be easy. But with your testimony, we can put these men away for a very long time." Isaiah reached over and took Eleanor's hand, his grip firm and supportive. "It's your decision," he said quietly. "Whatever you choose, I'll stand by you." Eleanor looked down at James, at his innocent face and bright eyes, and thought about the family she had lost. She thought about her father, who had worked so hard to build something for his children. She thought about her mother, who had welcomed everyone with kindness. She thought about her brother who had been only 14 when he died, his whole life ahead of him. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "I'll testify. My family deserves justice, and I won't let fear stop me from getting it for them." Marshall Hart's expression was one of relief and respect. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance. I know this can't be easy. The trial is scheduled for March. I'll be in touch with more details." After the marshal left, Isaiah held Eleanor close, feeling the tension in her body. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently. "No one would blame you if you changed your mind." "I'm sure," Eleanor said. "I need to do this, Isaiah. Not just for my family, but for myself. I need to face this fear, to stand up to the men who destroyed my life. And I need to make sure they can't do it to anyone else." "Then we'll do it together," Isaiah said firmly. "I'm coming with you to Fort Smith. Tom will understand and we can bring James. You won't have to face this alone." Eleanor turned in his arms to look up at him, this man who had promised to guard her dreams and had kept that promise every single day. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For loving me, for standing by me, for giving me the strength to do this." "You've always had that strength," Isaiah said. "I just helped you remember it." The months between the marshal's visit and the trial passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Marshal Hart visited twice more, going over Eleanor's testimony and preparing her for what to expect in court. Eleanor found the process both painful and cathartic, finally being able to tell her full story to someone who believed her and was willing to take action. She continued teaching through the fall and winter, though she made arrangements for a substitute to take over while she was away for the trial. Her students were sad to see her go, but Eleanor promised she would return as soon as possible. In late February, the Vance family traveled to Fort Smith by train, a journey that took 2 days. James was 9 months old now, a happy baby who charmed everyone he met with his ready smiles. The trip was exhausting, but Isaiah and Eleanor took turns caring for James, supporting each other through the stress and uncertainty. Fort Smith was a bustling town, much larger than Abilene, and the federal courthouse was an imposing stone building that made Eleanor's stomach clench with nerves. Marshal Hart met them at the train station and helped them get settled in a boarding house near the courthouse. "The trial starts tomorrow," he informed them. "You'll be the third witness called, probably sometime in the afternoon. I'll walk you through the process again tonight if you'd like." Eleanor nodded, grateful for his thoroughness. That evening, while Isaiah put James to bed in the room next door, she sat with Marshal Hart and went over her testimony one more time. "Remember, just tell the truth," Hart said. "The defense attorney will try to rattle you to make you doubt your own memories. Don't let him. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and you'll do fine." The trial was everything Eleanor had feared and more. The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and other victims. Garrett Webb sat at the defense table looking smug and unconcerned, flanked by expensive lawyers. Other members of the syndicate occupied the second row, their faces hard and unforgiving. Eleanor watched as the first 2 witnesses testified, both of them families who had lost property to suspicious fires. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar to her own, and Eleanor felt a connection to these strangers who had suffered the same injustice. When she was finally called to the stand, Eleanor's legs felt weak as she walked to the front of the courtroom. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, then sat in the witness chair and looked out at the sea of faces. Isaiah was in the front row, James on his lap, his eyes fixed on her with absolute confidence and support. That look steadied her, reminded her why she was doing this. The prosecutor led her through her testimony gently, asking about her family, about Garrett Webb's attempts to buy their land, about the night of the fire. Eleanor spoke clearly and calmly, describing the flames, the sound of horses riding away, her suspicions that the fire had been deliberately set. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. He was a sharp-faced man with cold eyes, and he immediately went on the attack. "Mrs. Vance, isn't it true that you were asleep when the fire started?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "So you didn't actually see anyone set the fire, did you?" "No, but I heard horses that could have belonged to anyone," the attorney interrupted. "Neighbors, passers-by, anyone." "You're asking this jury to convict my client based on speculation and grief-fueled suspicion." Eleanor felt her temper rise but forced herself to stay calm. "I'm asking this jury to look at the evidence. Mr. Webb wanted my father's land. My father refused to sell. A week later, our house burned down in the middle of the night, killing my entire family. That's not speculation, sir, that's fact." "But you have no proof that Mr. Webb was involved," the attorney pressed. "The pattern of fires, the threats, the timing, that's proof," Eleanor said firmly. "And I'm not the only victim here. Look at the other families who testified. All of them refused to sell to the syndicate, and all of them suffered mysterious fires. How many coincidences do there have to be before it becomes evidence?" The attorney tried several more times to shake her testimony, but Eleanor held firm, drawing on the strength Isaiah had helped her build over the past year and a half. When she was finally dismissed, she felt drained but proud. She had done it. She had faced her fears and told her truth, and no one had been able to make her back down. The trial lasted 3 more days, with additional witnesses and evidence presented. The prosecution built a compelling case, showing the connections between Webb, the syndicate, and the fires. They produced documents, financial records, and testimony from a former syndicate employee who had turned informant. When the jury retired to deliberate, Eleanor could barely sit still. She and Isaiah walked the streets of Fort Smith with James, trying to distract themselves from the waiting. Isaiah kept his arm around her shoulders, his presence a constant source of comfort. "Whatever happens, we tried," he said. "You were so brave in there, Eleanor. Your family would be proud." "I hope so," Eleanor said quietly. "I hope they know that I didn't give up, that I fought for them." "They know," Isaiah assured her. "And so does James. When he's old enough to understand, we'll tell him about his brave mother who stood up for justice." The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with a verdict. Eleanor gripped Isaiah's hand as the foreman read the decision. Guilty on all counts. Garrett Webb and 5 other members of the syndicate were convicted of arson, murder, and racketeering. The sentences ranged from 20 years to life in prison. Eleanor felt something break loose inside her chest, a weight she had been carrying for over 3 years finally lifting. It wasn't relief exactly, because nothing could bring her family back. But it was closure, justice, the knowledge that the men who had destroyed her family would pay for their crimes. Outside the courthouse, Marshal Hart shook Eleanor's hand warmly. "You did a remarkable thing in there," he said. "Your testimony was crucial to securing these convictions." "Thank you for your courage. Thank you for believing me," Eleanor replied, "for taking the time to investigate when no one else would." "That's my job," Hart said simply, "but it's people like you who make it worthwhile. Good luck to you and your family, Mrs. Vance." The journey back to Texas was lighter somehow, as if Eleanor had left a burden behind in Fort Smith. She still had moments of sadness, still missed her lost family terribly, but the constant underlying rage and frustration were gone. She had faced her demons and won, and that made all the difference. When they arrived back at their ranch, Eleanor stood on the porch and looked out at the land they were building together. The house, the barn, the fences Isaiah had constructed with his own hands, the garden she had planted. the life they had created from nothing. "I'm home," she said softly, and it was true in every sense of the word. Life settled back into a comfortable rhythm after the trial. Eleanor returned to teaching, finding renewed joy in her work now that the shadow of the past had been lifted. Isaiah's horse breeding operation was beginning to take off, with buyers coming from as far as Dallas to look at his stock. James grew from a baby into an active toddler, getting into everything and keeping his parents on their toes. Eleanor still had nightmares occasionally, but they were rare now and less intense. She would wake and find Isaiah beside her, already reaching for her before she was fully conscious. He would hold her and murmur reassurances, and she would drift back to sleep feeling safe and loved. 2 years after James was born, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was met with less fear and more excitement, though she still had moments of anxiety about bringing another child into the world. What if something happens? She asked Isaiah one evening, her hand resting on her growing belly. "What if I can't protect them?" "We'll protect them together," Isaiah said, covering her hand with his. "And we'll teach them to be strong and smart so they can protect themselves." "But Eleanor, you can't live in fear of what might happen. We could wrap ourselves in cotton and never leave the house, and life would still find ways to surprise us. All we can do is love our children fiercely and do our best." "When did you get so wise?" Eleanor asked, smiling despite her worries. "I've always been wise," Isaiah said with mock seriousness. "You just didn't notice because you were too busy being impressed by my good looks." Eleanor laughed and swatted his arm. "You're ridiculous." "And you love me for it," Isaiah said, pulling her close for a kiss. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1885, a tiny thing with Eleanor's honey-colored hair and Isaiah's dark eyes. They named her Rose after Isaiah's mother, and she proved to be a much more demanding baby than James had been. She cried frequently, slept poorly, and required constant attention. Eleanor found the early months exhausting, especially while trying to keep up with an energetic 3-year-old. But Isaiah was endlessly patient, taking night shifts with Rose so Eleanor could sleep, entertaining James while Eleanor nursed the baby, helping with the endless laundry and cooking and cleaning that seemed to multiply with each child. "I couldn't do this without you," Eleanor told him one night, watching him pace the floor with a fussy Rose against his shoulder. "Good thing you don't have to then," Isaiah replied, gently bouncing the baby. "We're in this together, remember." For better or worse, through sleepless nights and dirty diapers and everything in between. "I definitely got the better end of this deal," Eleanor said, her heart full of love for this man who had walked into her life promising to guard her dreams and had exceeded that promise in every possible way. As the children grew, the Vance home became known as a place of warmth and welcome. Eleanor's students would sometimes visit, and Isaiah's fellow ranchers would stop by to admire his horses and share news. Tom Tanner became like a grandfather to James and Rose, spoiling them shamelessly and defending their every action. Eleanor expanded her small library, opening it one day a week to anyone in the community who wanted to borrow books. She taught reading classes in the evenings for adults who had never had the opportunity to learn, and Isaiah would watch the children so she could focus on her students. The nightmares faded to almost nothing, appearing only once or twice a year now and then only as faint echoes. Eleanor realized one day that she had gone 6 months without a single bad dream, and the realization brought tears to her eyes. "What's wrong?" Isaiah asked, immediately concerned when he found her crying in the kitchen. "Nothing's wrong," Eleanor said, laughing through her tears. "Everything's right. I just realized I haven't had a nightmare in months. Isaiah, they're really gone. I'm free." Isaiah gathered her into his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I told you we'd get there," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I told you that love was stronger than fear." "You did," Eleanor agreed. "And you were right. You stood watch until I didn't need watching anymore. You guarded my dreams until I could guard them myself." "I'll always stand watch," Isaiah said. "That's what love is, Eleanor. Showing up every day, standing together against whatever comes, believing in each other even when things are hard." "We've built something beautiful," Eleanor said, looking around their home, hearing the sounds of their children playing outside. "Not just this house or the ranch, but a life. A real life, full of love and purpose and joy." "We have," Isaiah agreed, "and we're not done yet. We've got decades ahead of us, Eleanor. Decades of watching our children grow, of building our legacy, of waking up together every morning and choosing each other again and again." When James was 8 and Rose was 5, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant once more. The pregnancy was a surprise, as they had assumed their family was complete, but it was a welcome one. This time, Eleanor felt none of the fear that had accompanied her previous pregnancies. She had faced too much and overcome too much to be afraid of bringing new life into the world. Their second son was born in early 1888, a healthy baby they named Thomas after Tom Tanner, who cried unashamedly when they told him. Little Thomas was an easy baby, sleeping well and smiling early, and he completed their family in ways Eleanor hadn't realized were missing. Isaiah was 40 now, still strong and capable, but with silver beginning to thread through his dark hair. Eleanor was 36, content and confident in ways her younger self could never have imagined. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching their children play and talking about the future. "You ever regret it?" Isaiah asked one evening. "Staying in Texas, building this life with me instead of going back to Oklahoma, rebuilding what you lost?" "Never," Eleanor said immediately. "Isaiah, you gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You showed me that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story, that new beginnings are possible. I love our life. I love our children. I love you. I wouldn't change a single thing." "Good," Isaiah said, pulling her close. "Because I wouldn't change anything either. Except maybe I would have found you sooner, started this life earlier." "We found each other when we were supposed to," Eleanor said wisely. "Everything that happened, even the painful things, led us to that morning when you promised to guard my dreams." "And you did, Isaiah. You still do." The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their growing children. James developed his father's way with horses and took over more of the breeding operation as he got older. Rose showed a love for teaching and would often help Eleanor with her younger students. Thomas was still finding his way, but he showed promise in everything he tried. Eleanor continued teaching until she was 45, retiring to focus on her community library, which had grown to include hundreds of books. Isaiah expanded the ranch steadily, buying additional land when it became available and building a reputation for quality horses that extended beyond Texas. They faced challenges, of course. There were droughts that tested the ranch, illnesses that scared them, financial setbacks that required careful management. But they faced everything together, their bond strengthened by years of choosing each other daily. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaiah surprised Eleanor with a trip to San Antonio to visit his sister, whom Eleanor had met several times over the years, but hadn't seen recently. They left the children with Tom Tanner and took the train south, feeling young and carefree without the responsibilities of parenthood weighing on them. "This reminds me of our honeymoon," Eleanor said, watching the landscape pass by the train window. "Except we actually know each other now." "I felt like I knew you even then," Isaiah said. From that first morning when you trusted me with your truth, I knew you were special. I knew you were mine. I am yours, Eleanor confirmed, reaching for his hand. And you're mine. For 20 years now, through everything, you've been mine. That night, in a hotel room far from home, they made love with the passion and tenderness of two people who had built a life together, who knew each other's bodies and hearts and minds completely. Afterward, Eleanor lay in Isaiah's arms feeling utterly content. "I never thought I'd be this happy," she admitted quietly. "After the fire, after losing my family, I thought happiness was something that happened to other people, but you proved me wrong. You deserve every bit of happiness," Isaiah said fiercely. "You survived tragedy, faced down your fears, built a beautiful life. You're the strongest person I know, Eleanor." "I'm strong because you made me strong," Eleanor said. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You stood watch over my dreams until I learned to dream again without fear. Everything good in my life now exists because you walked into it that morning and refused to let me face my darkness alone." "I love you," Isaiah said simply. "I loved you then, I love you now, I'll love you forever." "Forever," Eleanor echoed, and it felt like both a promise and a certainty. They stayed in San Antonio for a week, visiting Isaiah's sister and her family, exploring the city, and simply enjoying each other's company without the demands of ranch and children. But as wonderful as the trip was, they were both happy to return home, to the life they had built together. The children welcomed them back with enthusiasm, and Eleanor was amused to discover that Tom Tanner had spoiled them thoroughly in their absence. The house was full of new toys and treats, and all three children had stayed up far past their usual bedtimes every night. "You're terrible," Eleanor told Tom affectionately. "You've completely undone all our discipline." "That's what grandparents are for," Tom said unapologetically. "Besides, you were young once too. Let them have a little fun." As James approached his 18th birthday, he began talking seriously about taking over more responsibility for the ranch. He had grown into a fine young man, tall like his father with Eleanor's coloring, and he had a natural gift for understanding horses that even surpassed Isaiah's considerable skill. "I want to expand the breeding program," James told his parents one evening. "Focus on breeding horses specifically for ranch work, smart, sturdy animals that can handle the demands of cattle operations. I think there's a real market for it." Isaiah and Eleanor exchanged glances, seeing their own entrepreneurial spirit reflected in their son. "We trust your judgment," Isaiah said. "This ranch will be yours someday, James. It makes sense for you to start shaping it now." Rose, meanwhile, was becoming an accomplished teacher in her own right, helping Eleanor with both the regular school and the adult literacy classes. At 13, she was mature beyond her years, patient and kind with students of all ages. Thomas, at 10, was still exploring his interests, but he showed a fascination with the mechanical aspects of ranch life, the windmills, the pumps, the various tools and equipment. Isaiah suspected his youngest might be the one to modernize their operation, as technology continued to advance. Eleanor and Isaiah settled into middle age gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They still took morning walks when their schedule allowed, though these days the walks were slower and more contemplative than they had been in their youth. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors. "Do you remember that first morning?" Eleanor asked one evening, her head resting on Isaiah's shoulder. "When you promised to guard my dreams." "Every detail," Isaiah confirmed. "You looked so tired, so haunted, but even then there was strength in you. I saw it immediately." "I was terrified," Eleanor admitted. of the nightmares of being alone, of spending the rest of my life living in fear. And then you appeared, this cowboy I'd never met before, and you made me the most outrageous promise. And I kept it, Isaiah said with satisfaction. You did, Eleanor agreed. You guarded my dreams until they weren't nightmares anymore. You stood watch over my heart until it healed. You gave me back my life, Isaiah. We gave each other life, Isaiah corrected gently. I was drifting before I met you, Eleanor, going through the motions but never really living. You gave me purpose, a reason to settle down and build something permanent. You made me want to be the man you saw when you looked at me. You were already that man, Eleanor said. I just helped you see it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun sank below the horizon. In the house behind them, they could hear their children talking and laughing, the sounds of family and home. Their ranch stretched out before them, a testament to years of hard work and shared dreams. If you could go back, Isaiah asked suddenly, to that morning when we met, knowing everything that was ahead, all the challenges and fears and hard work, would you still say yes? Eleanor didn't hesitate. In a heartbeat, she said. Every struggle was worth it, Isaiah. Every fear we faced, every obstacle we overcame, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it to build this life with you. I feel the same, Isaiah said, kissing the top of her head. You're my home, Eleanor. You always have been from that very first morning. As the years continued to pass, the Vance family became a cornerstone of the Abilene community. Their ranch was known for producing quality horses. Their home was known for being welcoming to all, and Eleanor and Isaiah were known as a couple whose love had stood the test of time. James married at 22, bringing his bride to live on the ranch and eventually taking over the full operation from his father. Rose became the head teacher at the Abilene school when Eleanor retired, carrying on her mother's legacy of education and compassion. Thomas moved to Fort Worth to study engineering, but returned frequently to visit, always working on some project to improve the ranch during his stays. Eleanor and Isaiah became grandparents, delighting in the next generation of Vance children. They would sit on their porch and watch James's children play in the same yard where their own children had grown up, marveling at the passage of time and the continuation of their legacy. We did good, Isaiah said one evening, watching their grandson attempt to catch a chicken while their granddaughter cheered him on. We did very good, Eleanor agreed, her hand finding his out-of-long habit. We took brokenness and fear and turned it into this love family, a legacy that will continue long after we're gone. They grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds sharp and their love unwavering. Isaiah's hair turned fully silver, and Eleanor's face gained lines earned through years of laughter and wisdom. They moved a little slower, needed more rest, but the fundamental essence of who they were remained unchanged. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered for a celebration. James and his wife and their 3 children, Rose and her husband and their 2 children, Thomas and his fiancée. Friends from the community, Tom Tanner, now elderly but still sharp as ever, former students of Eleanor's, fellow ranchers who had worked with Isaiah over the decades. Standing before this crowd of loved ones, Isaiah raised his glass in a toast. 40 years ago, I met a woman who was struggling with nightmares and fear. I made her a promise that probably sounded crazy. I told her I would guard her dreams. What I didn't know then was that she would guard mine too. Eleanor, you gave me a life beyond my wildest imaginings. You gave me love, family, purpose, and joy. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Eleanor stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, and raised her own glass. And you, Isaiah Vance, kept your promise. Every single day for 40 years, you've guarded my dreams. You've stood between me and the darkness. You've held me through every fear, and you've loved me more completely than I ever thought possible. I would choose you 1,000 times over in this life and the next. The celebration lasted well into the evening, filled with stories and laughter and love. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Eleanor and Isaiah found themselves alone on their porch once more, sitting in the same spots they had occupied for decades. "You still have nightmares?" Isaiah asked quietly. It had been years since he'd needed to ask, but something about the anniversary made him curious. "No," Eleanor said truthfully. "Not for the longest time. The fear that haunted me for so many years is just gone now, replaced by memories of the life we've built together. When I sleep, I dream of you, of our children, of all the good we've created. The darkness can't touch me anymore." "I'm glad," Isaiah said, pulling her close, "though I rather enjoyed standing watch." "You still do," Eleanor said. "Maybe not over nightmares, but you still guard my dreams, Isaiah. Every day you love me. Every moment you choose me. You're guarding my dreams of what life could be." They sat together under the stars, two people who had started as strangers and had become one through years of devotion and shared purpose. They had faced tragedy and fear, had overcome obstacles, and built something beautiful from the ashes of loss. Isaiah Vance had walked into Eleanor's life on a dark morning when she was haunted by nightmares, and he had made her an impossible promise. He had said he would guard her dreams, and for more than 40 years, he had done exactly that. In return, she had given him a life of meaning, a home filled with love, and a legacy that would endure for generations. As they rose to go inside, their hands clasped together as they had been countless times before, Eleanor looked back at the ranch spread out under the moonlight. Their ranch, their home, their life. Every fence post, every building, every blade of grass represented their shared history, their combined dreams made manifest. "I love you," she said, as she had said thousands of times before. "I love you too," Isaiah replied, as he always did. "Forever and always." And that night, when Eleanor fell asleep in her husband's arms, she dreamed of sunrise walks and patient promises, of a cowboy who had refused to let her face her darkness alone, of a love that had proven stronger than fear and more enduring than time itself. The nightmares never returned. She had found her guardian, her partner, her home. And in building a life together, they had created something far more powerful than either could have imagined, a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants. A testament to the truth that even in the darkest times, hope and healing are possible when someone is willing to stand watch over your dreams. Years later, when both Isaiah and Eleanor had passed peacefully in their old age, surrounded by the family they had created, their children and grandchildren would gather on that same porch. They would tell the story of how their grandparents met, of the promise made on a dark morning, of the cowboy who had guarded the dreams of a haunted woman until those dreams became beautiful. And they would remember that love, true love, is not just about the grand gestures or the easy moments. It's about showing up every day, standing watch through the long nights, believing in someone when they struggle to believe in themselves, and choosing each other again and again until choosing becomes as natural as breathing. The Vance legacy lived on through the generations, but its foundation was always that first promise made between two strangers on a September morning in 1882. A promise kept through 47 years of marriage, through challenges and triumphs, through the ordinary moments and the extraordinary ones, until death gently parted them, secure in the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved completely. Their story became part of Abilene's history, The tale of the teacher and the cowboy who had proven that even the darkest nightmares can be overcome with patience, love, and the steadfast presence of someone willing to guard your dreams until you can dream without fear once more.